Part 1. Fundamental Techniques in Handling People. If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. Principle 1, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Alright kiddos, gather around for a story. Once upon a time, in a big city called New York, there was a very bad man named Two-Gun Crowley. He did some really naughty things like shooting at police officers and causing trouble. But do you know what's interesting? Even though he did these bad things, he didn't think he was a bad person. In fact, he wrote a letter saying he was actually kind. Now, there was another bad man named Al Capone. He was a gangster who did a lot of bad stuff too. But guess what? He thought he was actually helping people by giving them fun times. Isn't that silly? And then there's this story about Abraham Lincoln, who was a really great president. He had a secret trick for dealing with people. Instead of getting mad and criticizing them when they made mistakes, he tried to understand why they did what they did. Even when he was really upset, he stopped himself from sending a mean letter to someone who made a big mistake. So, what's the lesson here, my little friends? It's simple. Instead of being mean and saying bad things about others, let's try to understand them. Maybe they made a mistake because they were feeling sad or scared. And remember, just like Abraham Lincoln, it's important to be kind and forgiving, even when we're upset. So, let's all try to be understanding and nice to each other, okay? Alright, you're all ready to dive into this chapter, and I mean dive like Two-Gun Crowley dodging bullets? Now, listen up, cause we're about to learn some fundamental techniques in handling people. So, grab your hats and buckle up, cause JJ's gonna take you on a wild ride through this lesson. Now, let me set the scene for you. It's May 7th 1931, in the heart of New York City, and we got Two-Gun Crowley, the baddest cat in town, cornered in his sweetheart's apartment. This guy's like a legend, right? They got 150 cops and detectives surrounding the joint, tear gas flying, bullets whizzing, and Crowley's just sitting there like it's a picnic. And what's he doing? Writing a letter, that's what. But not just any letter, a letter saying how he's got a weary heart, but a kind one. Can you believe that? This dude just shot a cop, and he's talking about kindness. But wait, it ain't just Crowley. We got Al Capone, Dutch Schultz, all these notorious gangsters, they all think they're some kind of saints. Capone's out here thinking he's a public benefactor, for real? And Dutch Schultz, rest his soul, he's talking the same game. They're like, hey, we're just doing our thing, spreading joy and happiness, while the whole city's shaking in its boots. Now, what's the point of all this? People, they don't like to admit when they're wrong. They'll twist and turn, come up with all sorts of excuses, just to avoid taking responsibility. You know who knew this? John Wanamaker, founder of them big stores with his name on M. He said, folks don't like being scolded, cause hey, we all got our flaws. Took him a while to figure that out, but better late than never, right? And then we got B.F. Skinner, the big shot psychologist, saying the same thing. Criticism don't do squat. You wanna see real change? Reward good behavior, don't punish the bad. It's basic psychology, folks. Now, let me tell you about a fella named George B. Johnston. He's out there trying to get folks to wear their hard hats on the job. At first, he's all like, you gotta wear those hats, or else. But you know what happens? They just take him off as soon as he's out of sight. So what's he do? Changes his approach. Starts asking if the hats are uncomfortable, if they don't fit right. Next thing you know, everyone's wearing their hats without a fuss. See, it's all about how you talk to people. And don't get me started on Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. They're like two bulls butting heads, tearing the Republican Party apart. Roosevelt's criticizing Taft left and right, but does Taft back down? Nope, he's standing his ground, tears in his eyes, saying, I did the best I could. That's pride for ya. But here's the kicker, y'all. Abraham Lincoln, the man himself, he knew how to handle people. Back in the day, he's writing nasty letters, ridiculing folks left and right. But then he has this moment, this epiphany. He realizes, hey, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. So he changes his tune. Starts showing empathy, understanding. He's dealing with generals messing up left and right during the Civil War, but does he chew 'em out? Nah, he keeps his cool, stays calm like a champ. And that's the lesson, folks. Instead of criticizing, condemning, and complaining, let's try to understand each other. Let's put ourselves in other folks' shoes, see things from their perspective. 'Cause at the end of the day, we're all just trying to make it through this crazy world. So, next time you're tempted to lay into someone, remember, keep it cool, keep it classy, and always try to see the good in folks. That's how we handle people like pros. Principle 1, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Criticism is futile and dangerous. Puts people on the defensive. Wounds pride and arouses resentment. Alright, listen up, you all. We gotta talk about something real important here. Criticism, yeah, it's like throwing gas on a fire. It don't do no good, and it sure don't make things better. Let me break it down for you. First off, criticism. Yeah, it's like poking a hornet's nest. You start criticizing someone, and boom, they're on the defensive. Nobody likes being told they're wrong, right? So instead of listening to what you gotta say, they're busy trying to justify themselves, like they got something to prove. And let me tell ya, criticism. It's like a punch in the gut to someone's pride. You start tearing them down, pointing out all their flaws, and what do you think happens? They ain't feeling too good about themselves, that's for sure. It's like you're taking a wrecking ball to their self-esteem. But here's the real kicker, folks. Criticism. It don't just hurt feelings, it stirs up a whole mess of resentment. You lay into someone, and guess what? They ain't gonna forget it. They'll be stewing over it, holding a grudge, just waiting for a chance to get back at ya. So, next time you feel the urge to criticize someone, remember, keep it cool, keep it classy, and focus on understanding instead of tearing folks down. That's how we keep the peace and build each other up, you all. Examples of futility of criticism. Theodore Roosevelt vs. President Taft. Teapot Dome oil scandal, Albert B. Fall. Alright, gather round, you all, 'cause we're gonna talk about the futility of criticism, just like Dale Carnegie laid it out. Now, let's take a trip back in time and look at a couple of real-life examples. First up, we got Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft. Now, these fellas, they had themselves a good old-fashioned quarrel. Teddy, he's out here criticizing Taft left and right, thinking he's gonna change things up. But what happened? Taft, he ain't budging. He's standing firm, saying, I did what I had to do. Criticism ain't changing a dang thing in that situation. And then we got the Teapot Dome oil scandal with old Albert B. Fall. Now, this fella, he's up to some shady business, handing out government contracts like candy on Halloween. Did all the criticism he got change his ways? Nope. He just kept on doing what he was doing until he finally got caught. So, what's the lesson here, folks? Criticism might make ya feel better for a hot minute, but in the end, it ain't gonna do squat. Instead of tearing folks down, let's focus on finding solutions and moving forward. That's how we make real change happen, you all. Lincoln's approach to criticism. Lesson from a childhood incident with James Shields. Lincoln's handling of incompetent generals during the Civil War. Lincoln's reaction to General Meade's failure to attack Lee. Alright, folks, gather round and listen up, 'cause we're diving into some Dale Carnegie wisdom with a touch of Hampshire racing flair. Now, let's talk about our man Abraham Lincoln. All honest Abe had a way of dealing with criticism that's worth paying attention to. Back in the day, when he was just a young buck, he got himself into a heap of trouble by ridiculing this fella named James Shields. But what did Lincoln learn from that mess? He learned to bite his tongue and keep his opinions to himself. Ain't no good gonna come from tearing folks down. Now, fast forward to the Civil War. Lincoln's dealing with generals left and right, and let me tell ya, some of them were about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. But did Lincoln go off and start criticizing them left and right? Nah. He kept his cool, even when things were going south faster than a jackrabbit on a hot date. Take General Meade, for example. Lincoln's sitting there, thinking he's got this golden opportunity to end the war, and what does Meade do? He goes and does the opposite of what Lincoln told him to do. Did Lincoln blow his top? Nope. He sat down and wrote Meade a letter, laying out his disappointment like a gentleman. So, what's the takeaway here, folks? Lincoln showed us that handling criticism ain't about getting all riled up and pointing fingers. It's about keeping your cool, finding solutions, and moving forward like a true boss. That's how you handle business, you all. Examples of diplomatic responses. Bob Hoover's response to Mechanic's mistake. Benjamin Franklin's diplomatic approach. Right, listen up, folks, 'cause we're about to learn a lesson in diplomacy, Hampshire racing style, courtesy of Dale Carnegie. First up, we got Bob Hoover, the legendary test pilot. Now, Picture this, Bob's up in the sky, flying his plane, when suddenly both engines conk out. Talk about a sticky situation. But does Bob lose his cool? Heck no. Instead, he lands that bird like a pro, even though it's beat up like a tin can in a tornado. Then, when he finds out the mechanic goofed up and fueled his plane with the wrong stuff, what does Bob do? He doesn't go chewing the guy out. Nah. He puts his arm around him and says, "Hey, buddy, let's make sure this don't happen again. You'll service my plane tomorrow." Now that's what I call class. Next, we got old Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the good old USA. Now, Ben was as slick as they come, let me tell ya. Instead of going around picking fights like a back alley brawler, Ben knew how to smooth things over. He'd say, "I ain't gonna speak ill of nobody. I'm gonna spread nothing but love and kindness." And you know what? That approach got him sent all the way to France as an ambassador. That's right, folks, he turned his diplomatic skills into a ticket to the big leagues. So, what's the bottom line here? Diplomacy ain't about throwing punches or slinging insults. It's about keeping your cool, finding solutions, and treating folks with respect. That's how you win friends and influence people, you all. Lesson from Father Forgets by W. Livingston Land. Understanding the impact of criticism on relationships. The importance of empathy and understanding. Alright, you all, gather round cause we're about to dive into a lesson straight from the heart, courtesy of Dale Carnegie. Now, picture this, you got this dad, right? He's all wrapped up in his own world, nitpicking and nagging at his son for every little thing. Ain't no patience, ain't no understanding. But one day, something hits him like a ton of bricks. He realizes he's been treating his boy all wrong, letting his own frustrations get the best of him. So he sits down, takes a good hard look at himself, and makes a vow to be a better daddy. That story, my friends, is Father Forgets by W. Livingston Land. It's a reminder that criticism ain't just futilely, it's downright destructive. It tears down relationships faster than a wrecking ball through a paper house. But you know what can build them back up? Empathy and understanding. See, when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, when you really try to see things from their perspective, that's when the magic happens. Instead of throwing around criticism like it's confetti, you start showing a little compassion. You start seeing the good in people, not just the flaws. And let me tell ya, that's how you build bonds that can withstand any storm. So next time you're tempted to tear someone down with your words, remember Father Forgets. Remember the power of empathy, of walking a mile in someone else's boots. Cause at the end of the day, ain't nothing more valuable than understanding and kindness. That's the real key to making this world a better place, folks. Quote, "To know all is to forgive all, breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness." Quote, "God himself, sir, does not propose to judge man until the end of his days, Dr. Johnson." Alright, listen up, folks, cause we're about to dive into some deep wisdom from Dale Carnegie, sprinkled with a little Dr. Johnson flavor. Now, there's this quote that goes, "To know all is to forgive all." Let that sink in for a minute. When you truly understand someone, when you know their story inside and out, forgiveness comes naturally. It breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. See, when you take the time to really get where someone's coming from, when you walk a mile in their shoes, you start seeing them in a whole new light. Ain't no room for judgment or condemnation when you've got that kind of insight. And then there's Dr. Johnson's gem, "God himself, sir, does not propose to judge man until the end of his days." Now, ain't that something? Even the big man upstairs ain't rushing to pass judgment on us mere mortals. So who are we to go around throwing stones? Instead of playing judge and jury, let's take a page out of the big man's book and show a little mercy, a little understanding. So next time you're tempted to cast judgment or hold a grudge, remember these words. Remember that forgiveness and empathy ain't just nice to have, so they're the cornerstones of a better, kinder world. Examples and stories. 2 Gun Crowley's self-perception versus reality. Alright, now let's talk about a fella named 2 Gun Crowley. This guy thought he was some kind of misunderstood saint, but let me tell ya, reality had a different story to tell. Crowley was a cold-blooded killer, plain and simple. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, but he sure did like to shoot folks. One day, he's out necking with his girlfriend, right? Just enjoying a little quality time. But when a cop comes around asking for his license, what does Crowley do? He don't just hand it over like a law-abiding citizen he pulls out his gun and starts blasting away. Now, You'd think a guy like that would have a guilty conscience, right? But not Crowley. Nah, while the cops are busting down his door, he's writing this letter like he's some kind of martyr. He says, "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kinda near one that would do nobody any harm." Can you believe that? But here's the kicker: when Crowley finally gets the chair for his crimes, does he show any remorse? Nope, not a bit. Instead, he says he's just defending himself. Like he's some kind of victim. Now, why am I telling you all this? 'Cause it's a prime example of how people can twist reality to fit their own narrative. Crowley thought he was some kind of hero, but the truth was, he was just a cold-blooded killer. So next time you start thinking you're the hero of your own story, take a step back and make sure you ain't just fooling yourself. Al Capone and Dutch Schultz as perceived public benefactors. Now, let me tell you about a couple of fellas who thought they were doing the world a favor. Al Capone and Dutch Schultz. These guys had a serious case of delusion. First up, we got Al Capone, the big shot gangster from Chicago. This guy, he ran the streets like he owned them. But here's the crazy part: he actually thought he was helping folks out. Yeah, you heard me right. Capone saw himself as some kind of Robin Hood, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. But let me tell ya, his idea of helping out involved a whole lot of violence and crime. And then we got Dutch Schultz, another one of New York's finest. This guy, he was as crooked as they come. But get these, he genuinely believed he was a public benefactor. Can you imagine? Schultz thought he was some kind of modern-day saint, looking out for the little guy. But in reality, he was just another ruthless gangster, causing chaos wherever he went. Now, why am I telling you all this? 'Cause it's a reminder that people can have some twisted ideas about themselves. Capone, Schultz, they thought they were doing good, but they were causing more harm than good. So next time you start thinking you're the hero of your own story, take a good, hard look in the mirror. Make sure you ain't just playing yourself for a fool. John Wanamaker's realization on criticism. Alright, let me break it down for ya, straight from the mouth of John Wanamaker himself. This guy, he was a big shot in the retail game, founder of them stores with his name plastered all over 'em. Now, Wanamaker, he had an epiphany one day. He figured out that criticizing people? Yeah, that's like spitting in the window, ain't gonna get you nowhere. See, old John realized that he had enough on his plate dealing with his own shortcomings, without adding everybody else's to the mix. So, instead of wasting his time scolding and fussing, Wanamaker decided to focus on what he could control himself. He saw that criticism just puts people on the defense, makes them resentful, and don't do a dang thing to solve the problem. And you know what? Wanamaker was onto something big. He understood that if you want to make a real difference, you gotta lead by example. You gotta be the change you wanna see in the world, as the saying goes. So, next time you're tempted to let loose with a mouthful of criticism, take a page out of Wanamaker's book. Keep your focus on bettering yourself, and watch how things start falling into place. Lewis Law's insights from Sing Sing prisoners. Alright, listen up, folks, 'cause we're about to dive deep into the wisdom of Lewis Laws, the man who ran Sing Sing prison. Now, Laws had a front row seat to the minds of some of the most notorious folks you can imagine. He saw it all, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. And you know what he found? He found that even the toughest, meanest criminals didn't see themselves as bad guys. Nope, not one bit. They come up with all sorts of fancy justifications for their actions, trying to paint themselves as misunderstood heroes in their own twisted tales. Now, if you think that's wild, just listen to this. Law said that most of these crooks, they spin their yarns so convincingly, they'd actually believe them themselves. Can you believe that? It's like they were living in their own little fantasy worlds, where breaking the law was just a minor hiccup in their quest for glory. So, what's the lesson here? Well, it's a simple one, folks. When you're dealing with people, especially the ones who've gone off the rails, you gotta remember that they ain't seen things the same way you are. They got their own version of reality, their own set of rules. Now, I ain't saying you got to buy into their bull, but what I am saying is this: if you wanna get anywhere with them, you gotta meet 'em where they're at. Try to see things from their perspective, even if it's as crooked as a dog's hind leg. So, next time you're scratching your head wondering why someone's acting like a total knucklehead, just remember Lewis Laws and his insights from the belly of the beast. It might just save you a whole heap of trouble. George B. Johnston's approach to enforcing safety regulations. Alright, you all, gather round, 'cause I got a story that'll make you think twice about how you handle things, especially when it comes to enforcing rules and regulations. Now, listen up good, cause this one's a real eye-opener. We got this fella named George B. Johnston, right? He's the safety coordinator for this big engineering company, making sure everyone's playing it safe on the job. Now, when George first started out, he was all about laying down the law, telling folks what to do and how to do it. But you know what he found? Every time he came at them with that authoritative tone, all he got was a bunch of sullen faces and grumbles, and as soon as he turned his back, they go right back to their old ways. But George, he's a smart cookie, see? He realized that being a hard-nosed enforcer wasn't getting him anywhere. So, he decided to switch up his approach. Next time he caught someone slipping, instead of barking orders, he asked him a simple question: "Hey, buddy, is that hard hat giving you trouble? It looking a bit snug?" And you know what? It worked like a charm. Instead of getting their feathers all ruffled, the workers started listening. They felt like George was on their side, looking out for them instead of just wagging his finger. And before you knew it, they were wearing their hard hats without a fuss, no grumbling, no backtalk. Now, why'd it work? 'Cause George tapped into something real important. To people wanna feel respected, they wanna feel heard. When you come at 'em with empathy instead of authority, they're more likely to listen up and do what's right. So, next time you're in charge of keeping folks in line, take a page out of George's book. Treat 'em like human beings, show 'em a little empathy, and watch how they start falling in line without all the fuss and feathers. It's a lesson in leadership straight from the trenches, folks, and it's one worth remembering. Historical anecdotes. Theodore Roosevelt's criticism of President Taft. Alright, you all, gather round, cause I got a tale about two heavy hitters in the history books of Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft. Now, these fellas, they were big shots, no doubt about it, but they had a falling out that split the Republican Party right down the middle. See, back in the day, when Teddy Roosevelt stepped out of the White House, he threw his support behind his boy Taft, who took the presidential seat. But old Teddy, he wasn't one to sit on the sidelines for long. He had his sights set on getting back in the game, so he decided to run for a third term. Now, when Teddy came back from his lion hunting escapade in Africa, he was fired up and ready to go. But when he saw what was going on with Taft's administration, well, let's just say he wasn't too pleased. He thought Taft was playing it too safe, and too conservative for his liking. So what does Teddy do? He starts throwing shade at Taft left and right, calling him out for his conservatism and even trying to snag that nomination for himself. He even went as far as forming his own party, the Bull Moose Party, just to stake it to the Republicans. Now, you'd think Taft would be feeling some type of way about all this criticism, right? But Taft, he wasn't about to let Teddy get under his skin. With tears in his eyes, Taft just shrugged it off, saying, "I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have." Now, what's the lesson here, folks? It's that criticism ain't always gonna bring the other fella down. Sometimes, it just makes 'em dig their heels in even deeper. So next time you're looking to stir the pot, think twice before you start throwing them stones. Sometimes, it's better to keep your cool and let your actions do the talking. Teapot Dome oil scandal involving Albert B. Fall. Alright, you all, buckle up, cause we're diving into one of the biggest scandals to ever hit the American political scene, the Teapot Dome oil scandal, featuring none other than Albert B. Fall. Now, picture this, back in the early 1920s, when folks were still riding high on that post-war boom, there was this fella named Albert B. Fall. He was the Secretary of the Interior under President Harding's administration, and boy, did he have some tricks up his sleeve. See, Fall was entrusted with managing the leasing of some prime government oil reserves, known as Teapot Dome, that were supposed to be set aside for the Navy's future use. But instead of playing it straight, Fall decided to cut himself a juicy slice of the pie. What did he do, you ask? Well, he handed over the oil contracts like they were candy on Halloween to his buddy, Edward L. Doheny, without even bothering with competitive bidding. And just to sweeten the deal, Doheny slipped Fall a cool $100,000. But old Fall didn't stop there. Oh no, he went full-on gangster mode and ordered U.S. Marines to kick out any competitors trying to get in on the action. Can you believe the audacity? Now, when all this shady business came to light, it shook the nation to its core. People were outraged, newspapers were burned with indignation, and the whole dang Republican Party was hanging on by a thread. But here's the kicker: did Fall repent for his sins? Did he own up to his wrongdoings? Nope, not even close. Years later, when President Harding's death was blamed on the stress of the scandal, Fall's wife flew off the handle, swearing up and down that her husband was as pure as the driven snow. Now, what's the takeaway from all this, folks? It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and corruption running rampant. But more than that, it's a reminder that even when the evidence is staring you right in the face, some folks will still try to spin their own version of the truth. So keep your eyes peeled, and don't let nobody pull the wool over your eyes. Lincoln's handling of incompetent generals during the Civil War. Alright, folks, let's talk about one of the most pivotal moments in American history, the Civil War. And right smack dab in the middle of all that chaos was none other than Honest Abe himself, President Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln had a tough job, you all. He was dealing with generals who couldn't seem to win a battle to save their lives. McClellan, Pope, Burnside, Hooker, Meade, you name it, Lincoln gave them a shot, and they all seemed to come up short. But here's the thing about Lincoln, he wasn't one to fly off the handle and start pointing fingers. Nah, he had a different approach, a more calculated one. See, instead of tearing into these generals every time they messed up, Lincoln kept his cool. He knew that criticism ain't always the answer. So instead, he focused on finding solutions and keeping the morale up, even when things looked bleak. Sure, he may have paced the floor in despair from time to time, but he never let it show to the public. He understood that leadership ain't just about barking orders and laying down the law, it's about keeping your head when everyone else is losing theirs. And let me tell ya, that approach paid off big time. Despite all the setbacks and blunders, Lincoln never lost sight of the bigger picture. He knew that winning the war was gonna take more than just one battle or one general, it was gonna take patience, perseverance, and a whole lot of grit. So the next time you find yourself dealing with a tough situation or a team that just can't seem to get it together, take a page out of Lincoln's book. Keep calm, stay focused, and remember that sometimes, the best way to lead is by example. Mark Twain's letters and their impact. Alright, gather round, you all, cause we're talking about one of America's literary giants, Mark Twain. Now, old Mark had a way with words, no doubt about it. But he also had a fiery temper, and when he got riled up, he didn't hold back. He'd fire off these scathing letters to folks who rubbed him the wrong way, letting M have it with both barrels. He'd tear M down with his words, leaving M feeling about as tall as a cockroach. But here's the thing, most of those letters never saw the light of day. Nope, they got scooped up by Mark's wife before they could do any real damage. See, she knew that letting him air his grievances like that wouldn't do nobody no good. It'd just stir up resentment and hard feelings, and what good does that do anybody? So, what's the lesson here? Well, it's simple, sometimes, it's better to bite your tongue than to let loose with both barrels. Sure, it might feel good in the moment to give someone a piece of your mind, but in the long run, it just causes more harm than good. So next time you're tempted to unload on somebody, take a page out of Mark Twain's book and think twice. Trust me, your relationships will thank you for it. Example of Thomas Hardy and Thomas Chatterton's response to criticism. Alright, gather round, folks, cause we're gonna talk about handling criticism like a boss, Dale Carnegie style. Now, imagine you're in the shoes of two legendary fellas, Thomas Hardy and Thomas Chatterton. These cats were masters of their craft. Hardy was churning out some of the finest novels in English literature, and Chatterton was a young poet with the world at his feet. But here's the kicker, despite their talent, both of these guys faced some serious heat from the critics. I'm talking about the kind of criticism that cuts deep and makes you question your whole dang existence. Now, let's start with Hardy. This dude was no stranger to harsh reviews. But instead of letting all that negativity get to him, he did something remarkably. He walked away from fiction altogether. That's right, he said, adios, writing novels, and focused on poetry instead. Hardy didn't let the critics dictate his path, he carved out his own destiny. And then there's Chatterton, the young gun with a pen of gold. This cat was on the rise, but when the critics started tearing into his work, it hit him like a ton of bricks. And you know what he did? He ended it all. Yeah, you heard me right, he took his own life rather than face the constant barrage of criticism. Now, I ain't telling all this to bum you out. Nah, I'm telling you cause it's a lesson in resilience, in standing tall in the face of adversity. Hardy may have switched gears, but he never stopped writing. And Chatterton, well, his story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of letting criticism consume you. So the next time someone's laying into you with all they got, channel your inner Hardy. Stay true to yourself, keep doing your thing, and don't let the haters bring you down. That's the Dale Carnegie way, folks, turning criticism into fuel for your fire, not ashes for your soul. Lessons and quotes. Criticism breeds resentment, understanding fosters empathy. Diplomatic responses yield better outcomes. Importance of self-reflection and empathy in relationships. Value of forgiveness and withholding judgment. Chapter Review Questions: Who was Two-Gun Crowley, and how did he view himself despite his criminal actions? Two-Gun Crowley was a notorious criminal involved in a deadly shootout with the police. Despite his violent behavior, he viewed himself as having a kind heart that meant no harm. What attitude did Al Capone, Dutch Schultz, and other criminals exhibit towards their actions? They rationalized their criminal behavior as being for the greater good or as a form of public service, portraying themselves as misunderstood benefactors. According to Lewis Laws, the warden of Sing Sing prison, how do many criminals rationalize their actions? Many criminals rationalize their antisocial acts through fallacious or logical reasoning, often justifying their behavior to themselves and others. How did John Wanamaker's perspective on criticism change over time? Wanamaker learned early in life that scolding is futile, as people rarely criticize themselves. He recognized that focusing on one's own limitations is more productive than fretting over others' behavior. What insights can be drawn from B.F. Skinner's experiments and Hans Selye's observations regarding criticism? Criticism is ineffective in bringing about lasting change and can lead to resentment. Positive reinforcement is more effective in promoting desirable behavior. Describe George B. Johnston's approach to enforcing safety regulations among workers. Instead of authoritative commands, Johnston adopted a more empathetic approach by addressing workers' concerns about safety equipment, resulting in increased compliance without resentment. How did the quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft illustrate the futility of criticism? Despite Theodore Roosevelt's criticism of President Taft's actions, Taft remained steadfast in his beliefs and actions, justifying himself rather than acknowledging fault. What consequences did Albert B. Fall face for his involvement in the Teapot Dome scandal, and how did his wife react to criticism of him? Albert B. Fall faced condemnation and imprisonment for his role in the scandal, yet he and his wife vehemently denied any wrongdoing, blaming others instead. How did Abraham Lincoln's experiences shape his approach to dealing with criticism and conflict? Lincoln learned from personal mistakes, such as his duel with James Shields, that criticism and ridicule are counterproductive. He adopted a more diplomatic and understanding approach to leadership. Share the story of Bob Hoover's response to the mechanic's mistake and explain its significance. Bob Hoover's compassionate response to the mechanic's error demonstrates the power of understanding and forgiveness over criticism and condemnation, fostering a positive and productive environment.